Hi everyone. So we hopefully have a fun podcast today because we wanted to have some commentary on what we've been seeing with Homicipher, and just our thoughts on it because it's been a very interesting time in the industry. So first
Mhm.
off, I'm Natalie. I'm the director for Nochi Studios, and I'm gonna pass it off to.
Hi, I'm Alexandra. I'm the writer for Nochi Studios.
So, if you haven't heard, there's been a visual novel that's fairly popular right now called Homicipher. Um, and I'm not going to spoil things because, like, there's tons of content online. You can watch it. Please go support them. They're an indie
Just
dev.
play the game. It's
Yep,
a good
yep.
game.
And it's just one developer who's made it, and they do have a publisher. So they do develop, and then the publisher publishes it for them. It manages the storefront, manages the PR
Yeah.
side of things, but it's just one person, and they go by Yanagi, and they're located in Japan. But what was interesting about this is one, it's blown up, right? And it's been great. There's been a ton of interesting streams, and people are really enjoying the game. But two
Yeah.
weeks ago, we're just gonna pop this up really quick. So 2 weeks ago, they posted, I guess November 18th, right? They posted about how people were DMing them and like it was very overwhelming. And it was just comments about like, hey, are you gonna make content? Are there any updates? And you can see here that they're getting a mountain of DMs and emails every day, and they're spending so much time responding to them that they can't actually have time to develop, to create the game, right? To create
Hmm.
content, to create what
Yeah.
they want to do as a developer. And so they're saying, please don't contact me individually. We saw that on the team. And I posted this screenshot on our work server and like we sort of talked about it because we see this too, right? I think this is one of those things where, and Alexandra, feel free to chime in anytime. But as an
Yeah.
indie developer, I think one of the beauty of being like liking indies is that you feel
Yeah.
more closer to the developer, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Versus you don't really quite know the team for big AAA studios because there are massive teams, big companies. Like you don't know who's working on the next Mario
Yeah.
game, the next like Final
Yeah.
Fantasy game, right? Versus
Or you,
people
yeah.
know for indie developers.
Yeah, I would say yeah, I think for those kinds of like AAA games, like you'll know maybe a couple creators, but like you said, it's massive teams as opposed to like usually with one developer, like our team is like you can count them on your fingers kind of
Yeah.
thing. So
Yeah.
yeah, and you see us around.
And then on the flip side, though, like that's a nice thing, I think, for fans and on our side, like we love connecting with people, right?
Yeah, yeah,
But similar to what Yanagi is experiencing, we've also experienced the influx of DMs. And I mean, I love getting like really sweet messages from players, but
yeah,
we've also gotten influx of spam DMs, um,
yeah,
soliciting DMs, scam DMs, right?
yeah,
Um, but then we also have to do our job, which is making games, and then we're filtering through all the content.
yeah,
It's hard. It's hard.
yeah. Oh yeah, and I think what's interesting is like I think we've in our social media we've made it very open. Like we have public discords and stuff where we encourage discourse, we encourage questions. That's a great place to like get to know us, but also get to know their users and have them answer your questions and stuff. And so, but I'm not sure where sometimes it comes from, like needing to send direct messages unless it's, like I think that's why we have channels for that, and
Yeah.
then it does cut into taking the time to have to funnel through, the messages that we get that we have to respond to in terms of development
Yeah.
versus the ones that are like, that you could put in a general space and we can like look at it later and when we have the chance to and interact
Right.
properly with it.
Right. And like sometimes, for an example, we get messages where it's bugs. Like, yes, we want to know about the
Hmm.
bugs ASAP,
Yeah.
especially if it's a game breaking bug. Like, we want to know about it ASAP and deal
Oh
with it.
yeah.
But then we
Yeah.
also get nice messages, which I again thank you everyone for being so supportive.
Yeah.
But like I'm not gonna lie, it like puts pressure to respond versus like,
Hmm.
I mean, you and I have stayed up so late. Like we've pulled all nighters to release our games,
Yeah.
right? And so it's
Yeah.
like
Us. Yeah.
we have to take time to respond to those. I feel guilty when we don't respond, and sometimes I forget to respond because I have 30 unread DMs in my
Yeah.
Discord. Um,
Same.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and I think the other thing, like with that kind of development, especially if you're porting to like Steam or other things, like the amount of work that has to be done to make sure, like in terms of bug catching, is like to make it compatible for all users and make sure that the game is running well and nothing crazy is going on. And we're very like, especially pre-launch beta testing and all those times, there's going to be peak times where that's going to be the big focus of making sure things are getting done. And like we've always been really transparent that we're busy all the time, like very all the time. Sorry. Oh. Yeah, I just we're we're typically really busy all the time, and so it's difficult for us to have to, like there's some days where that just what we're working on is the focus of our internet time or, time we're around, even with each other too.
yeah. Yeah, like, we have to because we're so in the zone now, we schedule hangout sessions with the team
Yeah,
to
yeah,
make
yeah. Like,
sure, like, "Okay, let's not
yeah,
talk work. We are gonna, like, 'Hey, Alexandra, how are you today?'"
yeah,
Right? Because
absolutely.
otherwise, like, we just, again, work until 2, 4 AM. Like, I was up until, like, 3 AM, just recently.
Yeah.
And that's just the nature of our work because I know indies do this too. Like for Yanagi, they have talked about how they have a full-time job, right? So they have a full-time
Hmm.
job that's not game development. And then they do game development on the side. So like I can't imagine that work-life balance versus for us,
Yeah.
we're doing this full time, but I think what's a little bit different for us is that we sort of run like a big I guess you can say like Automate, right? Or Idea Factory. They're double A, I think. They're not officially triple A, they're double
Hmm.
A. Like we run like a double A company.
Yeah, we're
Those
constantly developing all the time, and
yeah,
it's around the clock. And I mean, we've been pretty transparent of like we take our deadlines really seriously here, and I think that's part of the pattern that we wanted to make sure with everyone is like they trust us that we're working on it, we're getting things done. But it does come a little bit of that sacrifice of like we can't be also running our social media in terms of like being able to answer every DM, like you said.
yeah,
Personally, and we're the kind of people that we really take like our, the really compliments and also, criticisms to heart. So we want to make sure that they give like the that correct amount of attention too. But if you have multiple of those, it's yeah, you only have so much time in the day.
yeah. Which actually brings up a really great segue because today Yanagi posted a huge like blog up post basically about
Oh,
this.
okay.
So 2 weeks ago they posted that
I
Twitter
saw that
message,
one.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm just gonna read a quote from because it touches exactly on what you just said, Alexandra. So they said,
Okay.
I don't want to deal with users anymore. I don't want to reply to them anymore. The publisher demands that I produce according to a schedule. So we work late into the night and we release the game under extreme stress. And after the release, we have to fix bugs and update it. And then we have to deal with users. So far, I haven't been
Mm,
able to rest at all. So basically, now they're saying that like they're not going to create as much content anymore, or they're going to try pivoting. So they're like sort of musing about what
mm-hmm.
this means now, right? But like to your
Yeah.
point, Alexandra, like indie devs deal with this too. Maybe not
Mm-hmm.
all, but ones with publishers especially, like Yanagi, like
Yeah, yeah.
there is a
Well,
schedule here and there's like
yeah.
a financial situation going on with that publisher, right?
Yeah, I mean, I hear mangaka like do that as well. Like
Yeah.
any kind of artist, like if they're working under specific like editing deadlines and things like that, that's kind of the nature of it. But
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is
wow.
Yanagi actually made a comment that they're not a
Hmm.
mangaka because
Mm.
people apparently are sending them so
Oh,
much messages about when's the next update, when's more content. I want to see more
that.
content, right?
Oh, yeah,
Versus
yeah,
a
yeah.
video game is finite.
It's
Video game is finite unless there's
yeah,
DLCs, right? Versus
yeah.
serialization like manga, sure, there is going to be updates, eventually,
Okay.
whether it's weekly, monthly serialization, whatever the schedule is.
Yeah, yeah,
But
definitely.
yeah,
But even then, it's like once again, it's like a publishing is gonna be running those kinds of deadlines, and that's so overwhelming to hear. And also, I mean, from the psychology of that, like personally speaking, like if I'm hearing when's the next update, but you're producing content, then it's sort of like personally for me psychologically, I'd start feeling I'm glad you like it, but if you're demanding more from me, it is gonna take a toll on me because what if I put 100% on this project and then you're asking for more already? It becomes a recurring pattern, and that, yeah,
Yeah.
it
It's
can lead to some unhealthy expectations, like, and in our, like, we as ourselves as creators, we set those goals on ourselves because we maintain a high standard and expectation on us.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's what's interesting is so I'm gonna read this other snippet from
Hmm.
them. They made a point saying that their fan base has changed. There's been excessive demands from the younger generation when they're not paying for the content. So, for an example,
Oh.
even though I said I haven't set the character's height, many people still try to ask me for the exact height through DMs and emails. They bring up
Mm.
unconfirmed
Had that
settings
happen.
from the
Hmm.
prototype and rough drawing stages, and then they say things like, everyone, this is how it's set. And then they start treating that as official setting. So there's some misinformation that's going on, right?
Oh no. Okay.
So then they're
Ugh.
saying that they've been seeing people releasing these different unconfirmed settings, and then everyone's treating it as official or asking, is this official? And that people
Hmm.
aren't satisfied with the work just as it's published. This work is
Hmm.
neither a social game nor a commercial manga. So that's where the manga comment came
Mm.
from. But I think to your point about that, like constantly asking for content when that wasn't in the scope, that makes it very different, right? And I think
Hmm.
it's interesting that she also called out that people aren't paying for it. Um,
I mean, that's the thing, yeah.
time is money, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that that's, I mean, and I think that's an interesting thing because I think that's there are probably a subset of fans who feel like creating fan works or discourse alone is going, it is a form of being able to market the game like socially, but at the same time it doesn't always guarantee the monetary like compensation that comes with it. And so like and then it has been like a thing with cosplay as well, like the, like cosplaying at comic conventions and things like that, people are like, does it take away from people spending their money and their time and things like that on, instead of going to a convention just for cosplay versus, spending your money and being supporting the comic books and things like
Yeah.
that. So that has been like a recurring thing for a while, but I mean, I wanted to really go on and say, like, sometimes I've gotten DMs before, people asking very specific stuff about, I think it was like Somnium 11 or like a couple other titles. And I think that's one of those things where I'm like, I'm glad. And my usual answer is like, I'm really glad that you're reaching out, interest in the game, but we have a public Discord. And if you want to talk about it amongst yourselves, because I also think it's a very dicey situation of being able, I know she's like a single creator, but like with us as a team, to be able to go in and like just ask one person on the team like one specific question, even if
Yeah.
I was in charge of the storytelling, it's not a comfortable feeling.
Yeah.
And we have editing and we have other, like, we have group discussions, so it's never just a solo work. And even in her situation, it's interesting to hear her feel like she doesn't feel in like comfortable or from what it sounds like to be able to even just like add to that world building because maybe she doesn't feel like she wants to add to it, and that's part of her aesthetic of what that is. So
Yeah.
it's important to be respected.
For sure. And it's like one of those things where I'm a fan of a ton of titles and IPs, right? But
Hmm.
like for an example, I'm a huge like Yoko Taro fan, like of most of all of his
Hmm.
works. But like I would
Yeah, yeah,
again, this is like the blessing of being indie is that like you have direct access to indie and it makes it feel like nice because you get to see
yeah.
behind the scenes. But then also it's just like I know Yoko Taro is like hella busy with so many projects and I would not DM
Yeah,
him, right? Even though
yeah,
he has a Twitter, I wouldn't DM
yeah.
him asking questions about stuff. And also it's just like that's part of the at least for me personally, I think that's part of the fun of consuming a game is that you build up these theories and then you have this
Hmm.
fandom where you can make
Yeah,
fan fiction and stuff like that.
yeah. Yeah, I think it kind of trails the way I've looked at it as well as kind of like the reviews are not for the writers, they're for readers. I think like I mean I've grown up with the philosophy that if you have fan content, like it's kind of kept away sometimes from the creator unless the creator is open to sharing as saying, please send me your fan art, please send me your things. But I think in most cases like that's why I think people use Twitter because you can tag and it's kind of at your leisure to be able to be accessing tags and seeing, oh, these are fan art, from my specific title or my works and stuff.
Yeah.
But I think if you're going out of your way to send something in a private DM, it really does change the nature of the conversation. Because one, you're creating that expectation that you demand an answer, like here and then. And I think that's the that I can sympathize for is like, what if we're working on a crunch time? Or what if, I'm also when we're taking breaks,
Yeah.
I've gotten like messages during holidays or like time away. And if it's not being answered when we feel really awkward about not answering, but also it's like it's Thanksgiving, like,
Right, right.
you know?
Thanksgiving for sure. And it's
Yeah,
just
or even
like
just a
we
break, right?
should
Like,
have work-life balance, even though we don't. We should
yeah.
attempt to have work-life balance.
Yeah. And I think that kind of echoes a little bit into the demanding of content because I know that it kind of goes into a conversation of like it is quicker to finish games lately, like with the way content is being made, or it's quicker to get access to new things. But there is a beauty to like even with television things like the culture of being able to wait versus binging something and then immediately if you finish it, it's important to encourage people to like sit with the work a little bit and be able to explore it. And if they have questions about like, oh, there's going to be a sequel, I mean, in a situation like this, I almost don't blame like Bridgerton taking 2.5 years to make the story it wants to tell because it's like otherwise, people will just start to create a pattern of I need this like ASAP before, and it does set a template for how creators work,
Yeah.
and it can lead to really unhealthy expectations. It can lead to also being unrealistic about the way business actually works on the inside for developers. And like you're saying, also she's got a job separately, so that's a whole nother experience of like yeah, that's a lot to handle.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's a shame because I feel like it's such a good game that it's I hope she takes the time to be able to enjoy what she's made as well. And I think that does affect that.
Yeah, it sounds like it doesn't seem that way. It feels like it's a toxic relationship based off what she's been
Hmm.
writing and what
Yeah.
Yanagi posted today. And like,
Yeah.
I mean, they mentioned that they've lost their desire to create more content, right?
Yeah. It
Um,
it reminds me a little I don't know if you listen to Chapel Roan, but like she's been pretty like candid about like, sometimes fans, the way that the boundary between how fandom works sometimes does affect creators more than we think it does. And people sometimes forget that they're people and not characters that you're
yeah,
interacting with. And that's important too.
yeah. It's interesting because it really is a fine line. Like, okay, there's a fine line, but there's also like a for sure no line. For no line is
Hmm.
like if you are soliciting for services or if you're trying to offer like, hey, like you
Hmm.
want to write for our team,
Hmm.
we would post a job posting. So sorry, if you're
Hmm.
interested, like, okay, don't DM at least, like at least send it through our support inbox, right? Or like our generic
Hmm.
inbox. And that's fine because like email is less pressing compared to DMs, right? And
Hmm.
DMs is like shouting in your face, like respond ASAP. So like for
Hmm.
those kinds of things, like, yeah, don't DM. If it's just
Hmm.
a generic thing, send a general inquiry email,
Yeah.
use the forms that they've set up. If it's to the
Yeah.
publisher, send it to the publisher, right? Not
Yeah.
directly to Yanagi, especially if it's like, purchasing stuff. Like we've gotten emails
Yeah.
about like, or I've gotten messages about purchases not going through for the apps that we have. And I'm like, that's not on
It's a
us. That's
technical,
actually, like,
yeah.
on Apple and your credit card, or actually it might be your Wi-Fi service.
Hmm.
So most of my answers for those is, like, a canned templated response of, "Please contact this and this and this,"
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Yeah,
Um,
or like the public channels, like I said, sometimes the question that you might have is like something that another user might have like also asked on there, and
yeah,
it's going back to that like checking in. I mean, I'm one of those people that I'll check like Twitter or Reddit on something before I'm like definitely sure that it's something that I can raise
yeah,
because and then like you said, that's the nature of the DMs and I mean, we do have Twitter available, like in comments. Sometimes there's a ability to ask questions, but I think it's like I don't know. It just seems like I know that people want answers quickly, but I know that as long as they're willing to remember that we're you know we're not at our Discord all the time, and we usually take like a day. We try to keep it like a day turnaround with most of our responses too, to make sure that we can get to you. But things happen.
I'm not gonna
Things
lie,
happen all the time.
I can't respond to DMs now. I get so many DMs that,
Yeah,
like, I can't respond to them, but, like, I respond
yeah,
to the public Discord because, like, I know I'm constantly
yes,
looking at that, right? Or I'm hoping
yeah,
someone else will answer, like our awesome
yeah.
mod, Aria, for example, will
Oh,
answer. So thank you,
yeah,
Aria, or just, like, again, like you said, other
yeah,
community members who know the answer because they play the
yeah.
game. Like, you don't need a developer to tell you
Hmm.
about, like, some stuff, right? Like, other people
Yeah.
who play the game. Like, for an example, adding a Steam code, like that,
Hmm.
like, yeah, other people can help you with that, right?
Yeah,
Um,
that's technical. Yeah.
mhm, yeah. But then there's, like, this awkward line of we've received, as you've mentioned too, like, really sweet messages from, like, awesome
Hmm.
players, but again, I'm just so busy that, like, I can't respond,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
If
I'm
it's
like,
not a bug, I'm gonna deprioritize that amongst my 100 emails of people having issues of, like, actual, like,
yeah.
technical problems.
Yeah, because like
Um
at least with a DM, you have to open it up and you have to like get through it.
Yeah.
Usually with the public Discord, it's fine because we got like people post fan art all the time, and I love seeing the fan art. And it's
Yeah.
easier for me because I can just like switch between it, and like it's something that's interactable. And I mean, I like to encourage discourse because I love that, like I appreciate seeing the fan art, but I'm sure other people who love your same characters and stuff like
Yeah,
that. And it's a great way to connect. And
for
that's
sure.
the point of a lot of our games too, is like about connecting. And
Connecting, yeah.
so yeah. So it's yeah, I think there's just ways to go about it. I mean, there's a lot of things in fandom. I know this is like cross-cultural as well. So I do understand that there's some nuances that I'm not sure if like there's not like one big fandom etiquette rule book, and I understand that people learn from each other. But I do think that part of the goal is to try to encourage people to just remember that like it's great that you're really excited about something,
Mhm.
and but there's ways to go about being able to interact with content and remember that there's other people consuming it as well. And you're gonna also want to maintain like some sort of respect when you're dealing with the developers and stuff. I mean, it's disheartening to hear how she feels, and I in some ways I am happy that she's verbalizing it, because I
Yeah.
think that I don't know if this could be the first time that some people are actually seeing what it does to a developer, and
Right,
this is something we go through every day.
right. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a thing where it's she keeps saying, like, entitlement and stuff, and there is a little
Hmm.
bit of it, but to your point, it could just be that these young people have never been told not to do that.
Yeah, yeah,
And just
yeah,
like
yeah.
like to your point, that instantaneous, like I work with a lot of younger people nowadays too in other capacities, and like there's just
Hmm.
this they expect, hey, I can type into something into ChatGPT and I get an answer
Hmm.
instantaneously, right? Or type into Google, get an
Hmm.
answer instantaneously. But
Yeah,
to your point with content, that's not quite the way it works. And
yeah.
so it's I think you make a very good point. Like that, there could be a lot of people who just don't know this. But it's interesting because Yanagi is claiming that I'm pretty sure, like, I'm sure she's
Hmm.
probably looking at who's sending the DMs so she can get a sense of who it is. But
Hmm.
apparently it's people from the West and it's Gen Z that she's claiming. And
Yeah,
so she's
okay.
talking about how at the very end of her post, she's talking about how she wants to make content for older people now, and she doesn't want to make content for younger people.
That's
I
interesting.
know, because, like,
uh
I feel like we're seeing the
yeah,
opposite on our end.
yeah, yeah.
Because I I don't know about you, but I get more messages and angry, messages from older people, and I think maybe it's the space
Like
that we're
older
in
guys.
because, like, we're in
Mhm.
Otome, right? And so I get more
Mhm.
messages from traditional, Otome consumers, and, like, these are the people who are, like, play on Switch, who play on
Mhm.
console, who played on PS Vita,
Yeah, they've
right?
they've had more years to see how the space has grown and changed, and
Yes.
what the expectations are. Yeah.
Or they have a set of
Yeah.
expectations
Mhm.
because of their
Yeah, yeah.
prior experience, and because of that,
Yeah.
negative messages that I've seen coming through on our end has typically been from the older crowd, not the younger crowd, which is fascinating. Um,
Yeah.
But I think again, it's the nature of her particular work and also how it
Yes,
blew up
yeah,
instantaneously because, I mean,
yeah,
it blew up, right? Like, recently, versus
yeah.
our stuff hasn't blown up, so maybe that's why we're not seeing it, and so, like, our consumers tend to probably be older
Mhm.
versus maybe if we had a hit like, I would love to have that
Yeah,
problem, is maybe if we
yeah,
had a hit, then we're like, "Okay, actually, we're seeing the
yeah.
same issues." Maybe that's what
I
it
mean,
is, I'm not sure.
I've heard it from, I mean, I'm thinking of like other past fandoms. I know we've talked a little bit about other fandoms, like the Killing Stalking fandom.
Mhm.
I mean, the Alien Stage fandom. I think that there's always going to be an attraction to like the way that, like, kind of like what I was saying about how younger fans, I think sometimes aren't going to be like the paying customers, but they are definitely going to be the ones bringing in the discourse. And I think that, I mean, like just even growing up, if something was like really caught me like really, hit me really deeply, the first thing I wanted to do was just like do everything possible to express that. And I think that that enthusiasm is great, but I do notice that like being in some of the fandoms in the past, it does seem like people are going to kind of act on emotion, if that makes
Mm,
sense.
mm.
And I can kind of see that. But I do think that you've made a really interesting point though about like older fans as well, because I do think that that also comes from sometimes some of the encounters we've had is like acting on emotion, but I think it comes from a slightly different angle of experience. Like you were saying, like they
Yeah,
played a lot of games and then they're coming in, going, I have a set expectation for how this game is supposed to go.
yeah, yeah.
And and also, I mean, they come from different ranges of experience in terms of what they're doing outside of being a consumer. So
Yep.
I understand that because we get a lot of people who are like, oh, I write as well, or I do
Yeah,
this as
yeah,
well, and this is how I want to take the story. But I'm like, I think that's, it's great, but we as a development team, like we work on this story with the angle that we've chosen. It doesn't come out of like specifically like that we're looking to solicit for people to just come in and start it's like that's an interactive story in a different sense, right?
yeah.
And also we encourage fan fictions. I've read some great Somnium 11 fan fiction that I appreciate because I love to see what other people are doing with the story. But in for us to have that boundary of like what we're creating versus someone else saying this is how I create, and it's once again that reviews are for readers kind of thing because the writers typically in like published spaces should not be looking at reviews or this is how I would do it. That's not for us kind
Yeah.
of thing too.
I will clarify that, like, so I'm the
Hmm.
one on the team that reads all the reviews because, like, I do the user
Hmm.
research, right? So I do the
Yeah,
research and I'm analyzing stuff all the time. I'm looking at analytics all the time.
yeah,
And so, yeah, for you, Alexandra, I'll like tell you, hey, this
yeah,
is important for you to read
yes,
versus like, you don't need to read this because, like, we know the expectations that we had,
yes,
or it's like a one off, right? Like, are we
yes,
seeing the majority of the data that's saying, like, this is a problem? And we know we had problems. So, for example, for Sweet
yeah.
Core Brews, our sample bias was apparently really bad because prior to
Yeah.
launching it, we were getting reviews about people loving the Mad Libs. And then, like, once we
Hmm.
launched, all the reviews, not all, but the majority of the reviews talked about how they
Yeah.
hated it. And like people
Yeah.
hated the
Yeah.
match 3 prior to launch. And then post
Hmm.
launch, they preferred match 3 over the Mad Libs that
The
we
Mad
had.
Libs. Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
like, we tested with, like, 200 people, right? And that's a lot for a small team of 3 people. Like, I don't know
Yeah.
if I mean, okay, maybe I'm saying this because I'm biased, but, like, m m and any other indie developers out there, please comment if you do test with a lot of people, like, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
But, like, I felt like it was a lot because that
Hmm.
was about a third of our Kickstarter backers that we tested with, and, like, we were doing in-person testing too.
Hmm.
And typically, like, industry-wise, like, in the games user research industry, you don't test with more than, like, 15 people in person, and so we were constantly doing testing in person. So we were matching
Yeah.
industry standards, that's done on a triple A level too. But yeah, like, to your point, like,
It
we
happens.
have to
Yeah.
filter. We filter.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Not everyone on the team is gonna read it. Poor like, for Homicipher, like, Yanagi's the only
Hmm.
developer, so
Yeah.
she's reading
That's,
it all. There's no one to
yeah.
sift through it to, like, protect the
Yeah.
herself, her own sanity, right?
Yeah.
Um,
I
yeah,
wonder, yeah, like on one aspect, I wonder like how much is the publishing able to be like, will vet for you? I'm not, obviously you're not going to speak for how that like works on there, but like you kind of just pointed out, you
yeah,
vet reviews and feedback for me. So that way, when it's within that title, within a
Yeah.
future title, that's how we continue to workshop things, right?
Mhm.
That's how we
Mhm.
continue to figure out what works and what doesn't work. But I don't know if the publisher, it sounds like that, like how that vetting process works. But I also do know that part of fandom is like knowing, are you tagging her every post that you're making,
Yeah.
on Twitter, or are you DMing directly? And that does change the culture, because I think that to see that she has a personal page doesn't just mean it's a free for all to be
Yeah.
going through there. And I think that's kind of like part of like normalizing that, like if you know that you're like, I want to send fan mail, I want to do this, there are typically like
Snail mail,
VTuber
right?
agents.
You
Yeah,
send
yeah,
snail mail, and also it's just
yeah,
nicer to, and like there's no
yeah,
expectations of instantaneous response with snail mail or
yeah,
email, right?
exactly.
Well, emails like
Yeah.
I think she's also complaining about emails, so she did send a screenshot of her emails.
Yeah,
So like
or
yeah,
send it to the publisher. Yeah,
right.
or typically, I mean, I'm in the VTuber community and stuff, like in the fandom, and there's like specific channels that you go through to send fan mail. Or if you're interacting like in tags and things, you're never going to expect that person responds to you. But then also, I think one thing I've noticed is that there are specific tags that you follow on how you're going to share your art, how you're going to share not safe for work art, how
Yeah.
you're going to share content that you don't want them always being, exposed to, because some VTubers are very specific about the content that they want to curate on there. And it's not personal. It's just that's what's comfortable for them. And I think that
Yeah.
that's sort of the pattern that should be for developers as well. I mean, I feel like there is a different culture that involves with AAA games, but I think with indie space, it does almost feel like it sort of veers into that like space that we have with VTubers and other small content creators as well, and things like that, where online, mainly online, where
Yeah.
the boundaries are gray, but they shouldn't be, too gray for people to just welcome themselves to feel like, oh, this is my buddy. I talk to him on,
Yeah.
they, on Twitter. They're
Yeah.
accessible
Yeah.
on Twitter.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, right? I think depending on the size of the indie team or the indie
Hmm.
dev, there's phases too. I think
Yeah.
when you were like when we first started, we weren't getting that much messages, right? Because it was like we just had one game. One game, like,
Yeah.
okay, I can read every single message that we get in. But now we're all like on our seventh game and we are publishing them so fast. Like we just published 2 games in a
We
1 month
work a lot
period,
under the
right?
clock. Yeah.
And so like that's like what Alexandra mentioned earlier. Not only are
Yeah.
we getting messages for alpha, beta, and then post launch, and then like
Yeah.
2 games on top of that, and like it's still the same team. Like again, we're operating like
Yeah.
double A, like Automate and Idea Factory, but it's only 3 of us versus them. I think there's I actually don't know the numbers. My guess is like maybe at least 20 to 30 people, maybe more, maybe 100 even.
I
Um,
think so. Like,
I need to look that up,
yeah.
but yeah, they're a bigger company, right?
Hmm.
And they also have different arms. They have publishers as well versus like
They also
we
have
don't
more
have a
PR teams.
publisher. Yeah,
Yeah.
they have a PR team, publishing team, art team, marketing team, all
Yeah.
that. It's just the 3 of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then for Yanagi for Homicipher, it's just her and the publisher. And based off of what she's saying
Hmm.
about their relationship, all they do is the storefront and PR. And usually
Mm.
PR is like, she
Yeah.
does PR too, but publisher PR, depending on the deal that they have,
Hmm.
publisher PR is, like, PR that's pushed out to, like, Steam and stuff like that,
For
or
like
b
content, I would say like content releases and things.
yeah, like,
That's it.
updates and stuff like that. That's what they
Yeah.
typically handle, at least from the
Yeah.
deals that I've heard from other developers who have
Yeah.
publishing deals, but, like, she still does content, right? It's like, she still
Hmm.
pushes PR on her end, though, but, yeah, they're doing, like, PR in terms of updates and like store
Yeah.
related kind of stuff. Maybe with
Yeah.
journalists too, because they have those existing relationships. They send out the scene keys, whatever it is, or like they talk to
Hmm.
Nintendo,
Or
etc. Whatever.
specific, yeah, personal giveaways and personal interaction. Yeah. Like the
It's
way
the
I see
industry
it,
relationship side that
yeah.
they're
Yeah.
managing.
Yeah, yeah. Because I mean, the best comparison I have is, to me, is like mangaka with their what do you call it, with like the publishing company. Usually, like there's a difference in content, and yeah, they do promote their own content, but I personally feel like they're usually producing like work in progress photos or things that are obviously like, oh, I'm working on something that's going to be eventually published or being promoted as a product. But I think that It's interesting. Actually, I just remembered that there was this post that a Japanese artist made once that said for English speakers to be careful how when they retweet and stuff to be careful like we use colloquial languages like stop or go away like I can't believe this or I'm gonna die if for to express like positive reactions sometimes,
Yeah.
but they said that to be careful when you retweet to some like a Japanese artist who might not understand that colloquial speech
Mhm.
because sometimes they can their initial reaction is to take it as like oh some I did something bad, you
Yeah.
know, or this is the you don't like my work or you don't like my post. And I was thinking about that right now because I don't know like to what degree is that like like a translation situation is going on with these comments and these messages, but it does make me think a little bit about um how we that's once again it's like an internet etiquette kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, at least in the Homicipher's case, it just sounds like it's more she says the excessive requests of asking for more content, right? And so she
Yeah,
feels like that she doesn't have the time anymore because she's getting too many messages and it's stuff that
yeah,
like she wasn't planning on creating and now she's being
yeah.
asked to create these. And like that's also not a way to ask, someone to create something if it wasn't
No, and
in
that's why
their
I wonder if
scope
it's like a
again.
yeah, it makes me wonder if people like some people who are asking almost think that that's a form of flattery
Yeah.
as opposed to like being like, I love it, give me more.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
actually that reminds me, I don't know, this feels very specific, but in the ARG, like the augmented reality game community, there was a creator who actually went on hiatus for a similar reason because their ARG blew up. And it was a beautiful piece of work, but it was like a part one, and they were going to take some time. But they had made some comments on Twitter specifically saying like I was really overwhelmed. And I think that's the big recurring thing with these too is like there's a lot of anxiety involved in releasing a game. We go through that too. Like, you know, we just spent months crafting something that, you know, doesn't like with a piece of work, we're going to put a lot of time and effort and emotional effort into it. And once you create that piece of work, then you have the aftermath of also having to go through those throes. Similarly, when you release something and you're, you know, kind of watching it interact out and have people interact with it, and there's no breathing room sometimes to
Yeah.
be able to do that. And then if it blows up or if it doesn't blow up, like in either scenario, you're still going through that emotional roller coaster of what that is. It's just gonna be a different kind.
Yeah, I think there's emotional and then there's logistical roller coaster, right? Like you
Mm-hmm.
still got to check all the boxes of post release. Like, okay, we
Yeah.
have our
Yeah.
post release marketing, we have post release analytics collection, we have post release meetings, then we have to keep an eye on all the performance and all the metrics, right?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I would say, like, I'm the robot on the team, I wanna say, and so even if it's like,
Yeah.
I imagine I mean, I don't know what Yonagi's feeling right now, but based off it just sounds like she's super overwhelmed, and even if there
Mm-hmm.
wasn't, like I think there is an emotional piece because, like, people are commenting about, what she's
Mm-hmm.
doing, she's feeling like her work is not being
Mm-hmm.
like, she's not being thanked for her work, right? Because everyone's keep asking for more, and then she
Mm-hmm.
says that in her post, it's like, "No one's saying, like, thank you for this awesome material." Instead, it's just like, "Where's the
It's
next
a
content?" Right?
shame. Yeah.
But even, like, beyond the emotional side of things, it's like, again, she has work that she has to do, the full-time job, and then she's speaking to a publisher, the publisher has a deadline for her, and so it's like all
Mm-hmm.
these extra messages,
Yeah.
it's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It feels like that's always the hard like I'm not sure if this was well if this was like a commercial venture or just it started as a hobby kind of thing, but I think that from my perspective I like I think I've mentioned before like I'm a cosplayer. I compete competitively, but I also do that and a lot of the experiences kind of echo a little bit of what we do here in doing hobbyist work versus commercial work is the expectations align differently. And I'd be curious to see if she'll ever discuss a little bit more about what, you know, that process, but um it does change our attitudes about how we work and how we motivate ourselves. And I mean, at some point we have like kind of a system of we've created a community in the with these discords and things to stay connected because we think it's valuable to know what people feel and think and what they're experiencing with our games. But then we also have other processes in play to make sure that we're keeping ourselves motivated, stimulated. But for a solo creator, I can imagine that must be incredibly difficult to be able to figure out a roadmap um, while I'm trying to make sense of all that noise of, even and it's sad because maybe there are people that are thinking her, but there is just being clouded over um the comments that do I hate to say it, sometimes like negative comments and comments that can be misinterpreted like well can be interpreted as like I want more and asking more of you are going to probably take a little bit over of what your
Yeah.
frame of mind is.
For sure, because I mean, that's how we prioritize our work, right? Like again, I
Hmm.
please, for the people who are sending really sweet DMs, like I
Hmm.
really do appreciate them. And if I don't respond, it's not because I'm mad at you or anything. It's because I literally don't have time. But yeah, like when I'm sifting through my DMs, like I'll quickly read through things and like I have to prioritize because like we might be in a call where it's like shit, we got to get that next build out in order to launch on time. So like I
Hmm.
read it, but I'm gonna like I mean, people do this all the time.
Yeah.
It's like when you read a text message and you forget to respond
Yeah.
to the text message because something comes up,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's sort of how it is. But to
Yeah.
your point with Yanagi, like, I am also gonna be looking at the negative DMs first because I'm like, "Shit, there's a problem here." Like, I need to process
Hmm.
that first and understand what's going
Hmm.
on. But then we have to keep in mind that's how well, okay, this is not an algorithm because it's like the inbox of the DMs. But if you think about
Hmm.
the way algorithms work, where the loudest people are typically like the naysayers, right? And the naysayers is
Hmm.
what gets pushed up into your feed. That's most likely what's happening in the DM box too. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
gonna lie, I very rarely write reviews on Google or like for, establishments, unless it was
Yeah.
like a really bad experience. That's the
Yeah.
most
Yeah. Yeah.
likeliest time I'm gonna write
Yeah.
something to a business. The second likeliest time is if
Yeah.
someone asks me like, "Hey, if you enjoyed my service," I'm like, "Okay, they were actually, like, phenomenal. I'm gonna take my time to
Yeah.
write it because they asked me to,"
Yeah.
right?
Same. Yeah.
But I'm
Yeah.
also not as engaged online, so, like, I naturally just don't write as much. But, like, if you think about it, I think that's a good chunk of people online, is that you
Hmm.
don't engage unless it's something that's really negative. Again, that's we see that playing out
Hmm.
in social media feeds and algorithms, and that's probably
Yeah.
what's happening in DMs too, is one,
Yeah.
it's the stuff that's the entitlement requests that she's quoting about people
Hmm.
asking for more content and whatever other
Hmm.
non-positives, right? Like
Yeah.
requesting stuff isn't necessarily like a straight up negative, like I hate your content,
Yeah. I
but
was thinking
it's
about
a
that. Yeah.
negative what's the word? A negative consumption, negative in terms of brain power, right?
Yeah.
Like it takes
Yeah.
more time for the developer to have to process that compared to
Yeah.
thank you so much for the games. Like, oh, that's nice. And if they have time, they'll respond. If they don't have time, they'll move on to the next email.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of sits a little bit with like I think like you said, requests are great. I mean, to hear what people do you want more of? Do you want less of? I mean, it doesn't mean that's going to directly ever influence something, but it is important to see that, right? But I do think that like with our games, we're very transparent to like because we're Kickstarter games as well, what we allocate our time and our budget for as well. And I think that one of the things I've noticed in the past is like getting requests for like, why can't you add more of this? Or why can't
Yeah.
you add this? And I think there are some questions that respectfully will say, I'm aware that this is your budget or this is your thing, and is there any way this is possible? I think it's just how you frame questions and where you put them. If they're in a
Yeah.
public Discord and you're asking it and you can have a conversation about it and other people are going to understand, that's fine. But
Yeah.
I think like if you're sending a DM going, why don't you have like
Why don't you have
spike for
more
this character? Or
artwork or
why?
spice,
Yeah, yeah,
RAT, which we actually get quite a
yeah,
lot. And there's
yeah,
reasons why we can't do that to your point.
yeah. Yeah, and there's reasons, and I think it's like a rest assured we've discussed it before, and I think that's what we're trying to be here is to be
Yeah.
transparent of like there is a very high chance that a conversation we've had in the background, we've crossed that bridge and we've figured out this is what what we're doing, and I think it's important to remember, and I feel like that's something for other creators where I've heard other creators be saying like, please don't think that I'm just like some static person who doesn't know or doesn't do their research or isn't coming from a place like I think there's a place where we can all learn from, people giving suggestions out, but I also think that sometimes we'll get messages worded in a way as if this is our first time doing this kind of project, or we haven't looked at all the options, and it does come off a bit condescending, and it's a little difficult for us to navigate of like saying like we would hope that you can trust our work. We have documentation on Kickstarter for what we're using this for, how we use our budget, and I don't know if that's something that every company is going to do, but I feel like we've gone out of our way to be as transparent as possible of like what these games will include and entail. And I can imagine if someone's asking Yanagi for more content, I can't tell. I'm not sure if it's like a that kind of question as well of like this game is great, but you could use more of this.
Yeah,
And if
yeah,
that's the kind of questions like that, then I can understand where that can sometimes feel a little bit like, does that mean that my work wasn't enough? Or does that mean that like, there's a lot of implications you can make off that kind of remark, the way it's
yeah,
phrased
yeah.
specifically.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't like it, okay, so I'll say for us. For us, please do keep sending the comments, like, we'll probably respond, and
Mhm.
sometimes I feel bad about my responses because I feel like I'm over explaining, but to your point,
Yeah.
Alexandra, it's like, I feel like we have to over explain to be, 1, transparent and say, like, "Hey,
Hmm.
this is the reason why we can't do R18," and we've told people in the past is because
Hmm.
we're invested by some government entities, like, we've gotta be careful because of
Definitely
our
not, yeah.
investors for certain titles, right? And the
Yeah,
other
it's
thing
definitely
is,
not a
like,
personal
right, it's
thing.
not a personal thing, and then what's great is, like, when they send me data and I'm like, "Yeah, but the thing is, we've got contracts in place, so we can't do that."
Yeah,
And
we
so, like,
handle
I
like
do
games.
explain that, and I feel like it makes
Yeah.
I try not to sound condescending when I respond to people, but it's like, I'm just
Hmm.
gonna lay it out to you in layman terms. I'm gonna give you the business terms about it because this is a business situation.
Hmm.
It's not, like, this is my personal pet project, right? We are operating as an LLC,
Yeah.
and we have investors on the cap table, so there's certain things that we have to follow and certain regulations, right? Even with the platforms that we
Hmm.
choose to release on.
I mean, film
Um,
companies do it as well.
yeah,
Other game
yeah.
companies, any kind of media.
Please support the
Yeah,
other companies. There's so many other great games.
yeah,
And so I think to your point, it's like if you don't like what Yanagi is doing because you felt like something was seriously missing, make your own fan fiction. She's encouraging
yeah,
people to create fan fiction. She's encouraging people to
yeah,
create BL content for this, right? Like, make your
yeah,
own content and as a derivative work.
yeah,
She's blessed that. Also
yeah,
for us, like, we bless that too. Like, please feel free to. Like you said, we've got some
yeah,
really great
yeah,
Somnium stuff that we couldn't do,
yeah. I
but like
love
we
that.
enjoyed
Yeah,
reading from a fan fiction standpoint.
yeah. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think it's also like, don't, even if you create this content, don't expect that a creator has to acknowledge it for it to be a valid existing work. Like it is, like I think, like with Twitter and other spaces, there's a lot of more accessibility and opportunity to have a creator see your work and be able to interact with it. But at the same time, you like to create work just for the sake of that validation. I'm gonna just be personal and say like I don't feel like that's a way of creating content um that should be the sole reason for creating content
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah.
Because I think that if you enjoy the game or you enjoy a fandom, engage with them.
Yeah.
Have that be your conversation starter, and use that as a shared interest and an icebreaker to connect with other people. Because maybe even if you're not receiving that specific response, it's also like you're saying, like in most cases, it's because they just don't have time. I mean, algorithms. I think everybody's right now in the Twitter to Blue Sky and all these places trying to figure out where visibility works for on a commercial sense, on a
Mhm.
personal sense, things like that. But I think it's like less complicated than, oh, they went out of their way to avoid my work or something.
Yeah.
It's we're busy all the time, and like we said, the public Discord is a great place for that because that's connected to us. But even some days we're like we're all like working super late, and everybody, we're all like even in the same chat, right? Like we're
Yeah.
all in the same voice channel, and we're like doing our own thing.
Yeah.
That's how focused we sometimes get with what we need to do, and then we'll converge and
Yeah.
try to make time for that.
Yeah, I think I sort of lost my train of thought there, but I think you made some really great points with that. Oh my god, there was something that you said that just, like, really resonated with me. What was it?
Like,
I don't
don't
remember.
expect validation
The
or.
validation piece, oh, yeah, okay, so, like, to your point, yes, on time and, like, the validation piece, but also
Mhm.
this might be something that people don't consider, and I don't think this is the case for Yanagi because I think they're actually getting burnout from like the
Mhm.
hundreds of messages they're getting every day. But
Mhm.
there's a legal aspect too. Like for
Yes.
us,
Yeah, yeah,
when
yeah.
we do our Kickstarters for some of our like create your characters stuff, we actually have people sign legal paperwork so that we don't get sued later on, right? Um,
Mhm.
and like when you're working with publishers and things like that, we will they always like when you're ever in a contract situation working with a publisher is getting money or whatever it is, you have the legal aspect of do you own this work, right? And I think there's so much of that now where people like claim
Mhm.
plagiarism, claim all these other things, right?
Yeah.
So it's also from a safety perspective, for
Yep.
maybe some developers that like maybe some people haven't thought of is that they shouldn't necessarily read it because
Yeah.
what if they have a
Well,
similar idea and then you see it later
yeah,
on
that's
in
what
their
I was gonna
content,
say.
right?
That is personally 95% of the time probably why I will interact. Like, I love reading fan fiction, like other people's fan fiction and stuff, but I am very careful if I notice that it's something specifically that either we're touching upon. We've been candid before where we're like, we probably will save a game until
Yeah.
if it's thematically just seems from the cover that we're
Yeah.
like, oh, this might be something that we might be kind of matching a little bit or and if we something that we're not sure, we just don't want to disrespect the work by making anybody feel discomfort and that. But and also just like we subconsciously like a lot of it is subconscious behaviors too,
Mhm.
and you find it in design or any kind of creative work. But yeah, I definitely agree that that's something that like I'm there's a chance that I'm going out of my way to make
Not
sure that
consume content for a
yeah,
specific reason.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Like, one, it
or
could
like
turn off our creative process, right? Or, like,
yeah,
then you start comparing too much, and we don't wanna do that because we
yeah.
wanna create original works, original ideas,
Yeah.
which hopefully people have
And
noticed from our games that, like, there's a little bit of something different for
yeah.
everyone, right? Like, different
Yeah.
gameplay style. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean the legal component is really important because even for me, like I said, it's uncomfortable to ask. I've had people ask me things that are not found in the art book or are not found in any specific documentation in our game about a character. And the issue I have with doing things is there are other authors and creators out there who are comfortable and are at their like they have a very different contract structure on how they can discuss world building, do world building that goes outside of the works freely. And I think that's something that Yana was sort of talking about of like asking questions about very specific things or trying to find a very specific answer to something that maybe she left open-ended.
Yeah.
And
For a
she has like
reason,
her own
right?
reasons.
For
Yeah,
a
she has
reason,
her
a
own reason
creative
for doing that.
reason.
Yeah, and I think like sometimes I understand that there is, when you're reading something and you're like, oh, I want to make sure that there's some specific specs. I know there's games out there that will really get feel comfortable doing that, but sometimes some things are left
For
purposely like
interpretation.
ambiguous on a choice. Yeah, it's for interpretation, it's for the creativity of it, and it's okay to respect that. And also, I just don't feel comfortable giving one like answer on Twitter or a DM or somewhere, and then later on it be contradicted in some form. I think that like I don't know, I don't feel comfortable being able to get into that because then at the same time I don't want us to be able to then feel like people are getting just random, answers of this character's height and later on this character doesn't reflect the height in the game or something else and
Yeah.
it's just very specific. I don't know. It's
Yeah, it's a development process, right? Like
yeah.
we start with specs. And these
Yeah.
specs change throughout. Like a character
Oh,
changes
oh my God,
significantly
yeah.
from when we concept work and then all the way until when
Yeah.
we publish. And like we
Yeah.
also change things based off of player feedback. So yes, please do continue like if you are part of our
Hmm.
Kickstarter backers and like, we set up a channel for them to post all sorts of feedback. We do read those again. So don't think that
Hmm.
like we don't read those. We do read those, but we just have to prioritize when
Yeah.
we answer and how we're addressing
Yeah.
them. So if it's stuff like quality of life things, like we push out of the bottom because we've got game breaking things where it's like shit, we
Hmm.
like completely mischaracterized someone. Then like, okay,
Hmm.
we got to review this because we want to make sure that people feel like their voices
Yeah.
are heard if they identify themselves with
Yeah.
that character, right? That's the
Yeah.
bigger issue than like I don't know, height? Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, no, yeah, I know, and it's one of those things where I feel like, yeah, maybe I worked on creating the character, but I'm like, maybe we all feel differently. There's been interesting conversations I've had where I'm locked in on a character, but then I'll have to stop and gut check with other members of the team, and that's something that I think I'm sure other creators in most teams will have to do some kind of gut check work. And I think that yeah, that's not necessarily like if it has not been included, it's either on purpose or it's not something that we feel like is a very prioritized thing. Like even in cosplay, height is not really something that I think needs to be reflected. So if you're telling me like you're asking this for a cosplay, I'm like, no, as a cosplayer, I think you should be feel freedom to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I
I think it's fair to ask. So my take is I think
yeah.
it's fair to ask, but don't
Of
expect an
course, yeah,
answer. Like if you don't
yeah,
get an answer, don't get offended and then don't say something about the developer saying like the
yeah,
developer's not listening to you.
yeah.
Um
Or discuss it on the general channel and see what other people think. Because I personally love a lot of people having conversations about Somnium 11 because there's some interesting parts in there that I feel like there were people trying to figure out, is this what happens? This what like
it's
this character?
cool.
And it's
It's
cool because
cool. Yes.
yeah, and I am not gonna. I don't believe in necessarily definitively telling people how to feel because I think we all are not being like we need to be respectful of other people's perspectives.
Experiences.
When you're reading something, yeah, you're gonna bring
Mhm.
in your experiences, and definitely with our works, we actually try to really go out of our way to think about that.
Yeah.
Because if we're forcing you how to feel, I think that there's a specific direction and genre. Like every writer's going to have a different point of view on this, but at
Yeah.
least for me, I think that there are moments, especially in an interactive game, where you want to leave a little bit of room to let the player breathe and be able to inject some of their thoughts. And we've had that discussion with a game like Plastic Trick, where you have a set main character, and
Mhm.
then you have Stellafire, where we're willing to let you customize your character a little bit more. And so those are all conversations that you can tell in our games we've been having,
Yeah.
and we'll
Yeah.
continue to have.
Yeah. And I mean, we do again read all the feedback and like we've
Hmm.
people kept asking for MC customization, right? And like or features. So that's a feature.
Yeah,
So like
yeah, yeah,
Yanagi's getting questions
yeah,
about like when's the next content, when's this route, all this stuff that's good.
yeah.
For us, like we get similar stuff. Like we, for an example, for Somnium, when Somnium first came out in 2021, it's been
I think
we're
it was
hitting 3 years now.
2021. Yeah,
2022. Okay. Anyways,
I think it
maybe
was
it's
20.
2022.
I
It's
think it
been
was
a
early
while.
2022. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So when Somnium first came out, people were asking for more content, and they kept because we
Mhm.
had so much artwork in the game, people kept asking for why isn't Roman a love interest? Why isn't Lysander a love interest? Why isn't Minty a love interest? Right. Well,
Yeah.
originally in the scope, we had planned for everyone to have like some kind of DLC at some point. But the
Hmm.
sales weren't there, and so when sales aren't
Hmm.
there, like, I don't know what Yanagi's well, for Yanagi, her situation is probably she can't handle the workload, she's a solo dev,
Yeah.
right? For us, our
Yeah.
situation was, you can keep asking for the content, but, like, we gotta
We need to
pay
see it.
ourselves, like,
Yeah, we have to.
she's getting money from
Yeah.
the publisher. We are the
Hmm.
publisher, we publish our own games, and so,
Yeah.
like, if we're not seeing the money, like, we gotta pay ourselves so that we can
Yeah.
afford food on the table, we can
Yeah.
afford our rent, um,
Yeah.
and so
And like
that's
we
why.
appreciated, yeah, we appreciated the people who were pushing for it because like we know you showed up for it,
Yeah,
kind of thing
yeah,
too. But then at the same time, yeah, it's there's a lot of like logistical decisions that go into it. And we had to make decisions at the time of like, do we keep continuing this project? Do we had to, we were gonna like shortly after that Untold Atlas was in works and stuff. So like the way that also like game scheduling works too is and you say with investors too, we have to keep to certain schedules and with Kickstarter as well. So
yeah,
a lot of those kinds of decisions are also ultimately made based on feedback and like in terms of the like commercial feedback in terms of
mhm.
like
The
and
dollars
that
spent,
and
like, we keep
yeah,
an
yeah,
eye on what game's doing well, we're like, "Okay, that game
yeah.
didn't do well, so there's probably some elements," and we're triaging everything. We're triaging the
Hmm.
numbers in terms of game sales. We're triaging the time people are spending within the game, how much replaying has
Hmm.
happened. So we track a lot of stuff. And then we're looking at qualitative data too, right? Like the actual reviews, what people are saying online, what people's
Hmm.
sentiments are on social media. If it's getting posted, if it's getting posted, we're like, okay, that's good. If it's completely silent, we gotta review why it's silent. Is it a bad game? Is it our fault
Hmm.
because we didn't do enough marketing? Is it just like such a weird concept? Which is our theory right now for Plastic Trick. Because like the reviews are great, but it's really silent on Plastic Trick
Yeah.
right now. So
Yeah.
we are looking at these things and trying to figure out like where our efforts go,
Yeah.
right? But then
Yeah.
again,
Where things are.
we're doing this on top of receiving all these DMs, all these emails. And again, I'm not saying that like don't DM us, like please feel free to, but if we don't respond, it's probably
Yeah.
because we're doing a bunch of other stuff to make sure that like we can stay
Yeah.
open as a studio. And I think that's the other thing that people don't think about sometimes is um now this is not the case for every developer, but for us
Hmm.
like the reason why we're making so many games is because we have to in order to stay open as a studio. If
Hmm.
we didn't, how are we making our payroll, right? How are we paying ourselves for our like W2 contracts and everything? Versus a lot of other indie developers have a fortunate situation where they have a full-time job and then they run a Kickstarter and the Kickstarter is to bolster this as like a side project. For us, it's not a side project. We have deadlines because we got to make sure that we make
Hmm.
payroll so that we have revenue coming in, right, to pay ourselves. Um, for Yanagi, her situation it sounds like is she doesn't have the time because she has the full-time job
Hmm.
and then she has to speak to the publisher and the
Yeah.
publisher is fronting I don't know what their deal is because every publishing contract is a little bit
It's
different,
different.
but,
Yeah.
like, they're fronting some cost, right? And so she has to
Hmm.
speak to deadlines to the publisher to make sure her work gets out on time and, like, she's fixing
Yeah.
bugs or whatever the publisher's telling her, like, "Hey, you gotta, like, do this for the game." She's gotta do that on top of reading all those
Yeah.
DMs and all those requests, which is, like, all extra stuff that's not in her contract with them.
Yeah. Yeah. It mean yeah, that's oh my gosh. Like I can only imagine. I mean, when I was first working on something time, I was a student. I was a full-time student. And that alone was like really overwhelming of as a student because I was enjoying sifting time and we had an interesting like schedule, a release schedule with it. But like even thinking about the frame of that is just I can't- it's like working full time on a game. Like we've been this, and Snifting Time was the only title I had to do that for. But ever since then, like the amount of work that we do on one title alone is like it's a lot. And
Yeah.
like I know our developer Kira is like would probably say the same. Like she's working around the clock when the game is out, kind of thing, and making sure that game runs smoothly. And I mean, that also is part of our message. It's our silent message that we're making sure that this game is accessible to everyone. We're making sure that it's an enjoyable experience, it's smooth.
To the
Um,
best of our
we,
abilities,
yeah, to the
yeah.
best of our ability,
Yeah.
and we're trying to run those patches ASAP if there's something that comes up. Because I think Stellafire, there were like a little bit of sprite things
We're still
that it
making
just,
patches, you know? We launched it
yeah,
on
yeah,
what, November 12th, November
yeah,
10th-ish? We're still making
yeah.
patches right now, right?
Yeah,
At that
and it's stuff
time
that we beta tested for too.
yep,
So and that's how it works. Unfortunately, with any kind of game, I mean, you see it in AAA games all the time. It's you can test and test and test, but once it gets into the hands of multiple different systems, we're talking about phones and what do you call it, like PCs and things that like we don't know what's in your computer, or we don't know how it's running. So we're trying our best to make sure it's all optimized. That alone is an insane amount of work to do, whether you're in a small team or a big team.
or again, that earlier example of, we were testing with people, but then somehow, this
Yeah,
subset of 200 people played the
testing. Yeah.
game somewhat differently or like they had different expectations than the
Hmm.
public expectations, and we do our best to make sure it's like as unbiased as possible. Like we have screening criteria for when we do in-person testing because that's usually how it
Hmm.
goes in AAA too, is like you
Hmm.
specifically pick out
Yeah,
people,
my
right?
friends are in QA. Yeah.
But the thing is like people do weird things, or unexpected things that, like, we can't
Yeah.
explain, and, like, people do this for fun too, right? Like, you see YouTube streams of people playing incorrectly on purpose to, like, break the game,
Hmm.
but there's just sometimes certain
Yeah.
behaviors that, like, we just didn't catch because even though we've done hours and hours of playtesting, we have 200 plus people playtesters, and, like, we've done,
Yeah.
5 to 10 in-person playtesting sessions where, like,
Yeah.
for Cellifier, I was in the office until, like, 11:30 PM with, like, people
Yeah.
playtesting in person, like,
Yeah,
watching them and taking
and
notes the whole time, and there's still stuff
absolutely.
that comes up after launch. It's
Yeah.
like, how did we miss that?"
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is like when you only have a finite amount of time, like these sessions are not like insane. Like they can never be realistically like all day. You know what I
I
mean? Like
can't go into their home, right?
yeah,
And I can't just
yeah,
hang out on their bed while they're, like, playing in their bed.
yeah,
Like, this it's like we try to simulate it as much as possible by, like, "Okay, here's a comfy
yeah.
space, come into our office, here's a couch, here's a nice, screen and everything." But, like, again,
Hmm.
to your point, it's not gonna always be perfect simulation of what someone does.
No, absolutely. And I think that's kind of where I I hope that in some way people get like people can learn a little from this experience and maybe um I hope in some ways it empowers other creators to be a bit more vocal. I mean, we're here being vocal about this because we're trying to definitely say like we want to hear from you, we want to stay connected with you, but at the same time, we understand that like I don't know how other places are going to withhold this information, but we don't think we think that it's not this kind of knowledge is actually helpful to make other people understand what our schedules look like and what our priorities have to be. It's not definitely doesn't come from like a personal place.
Yeah.
What you're seeing online is not always a reflection. I mean, I sometimes I wonder if people see that we have so many games like we're working on simultaneously of like we have Plastic Chick and then we have Stellafire that I know that there's a subset of people who are going to be like, wow, they're busy. But then also at the same time, I feel like sometimes there's also a subset of people who think, oh, they've got this down pat that it's so well oiled that they're so accessible to like, there's nothing there that's like breaking their stride. But at the same time, it's like there is a lot of work that's going on behind the scenes. There's a lot of planning, and that also does mean that we're um also trying to create like systems and processes that actually keep us healthy, keep us sane, and keep us like in a good position to even like to keep doing this. Like you said, we in a situation where we need to keep creating games.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think I can say from our perspective what would be the best solution if, like, let's say one of our games blew up like Yanagi did with Homicipher,
Hmm.
and we started getting like I mean, we already get lots of emails and like messages every single
Hmm.
day, but to her astronomical amount, like I can't even imagine
Yeah.
what it is, right? If we got bombarded to that point, and I think if we ever got some questions where it's like, I just don't have
Hmm.
time to answer this, I'd probably just do like a ask me anything like live stream like
Yeah,
this,
like an
right?
AMA. Yeah.
AMA just to get those answers out of the way, and, like, what I can't answer, I'm gonna tell you straight up, "I can't answer that," or, like, "We can't answer it," versus the time spent to read each individual email, especially if the emails or DMs are the same messages over and over again, and having to respond to the
Hmm.
same messages over and over again is
Hmm.
very time consuming compared to doing, like, an AMA or something. Now,
Yeah.
I don't know if Yanagi feels comfortable with that, and I think that she's in a situation where, like, she's fed up at this point because, again, she mentioned a lot of not feeling appreciated for the work that she put out and, like, people aren't
Yeah.
paying, right? So I think
Yeah.
that's a little bit different situation where it's she's seeing success, but on the flip side of success, you deal with issues like this too.
Yeah. There's yeah definitely a logistical issue on that end, and I mean I like transparently like that is a hard one to that's a hard one because I think that like I can see where she's feeling a little bit like, at least from a personal stance, I think it's like everybody wants to have their work valued, like at the amount of effort and time they put in. And I think that's not a bad thing to have expectations for that. But then also going into a commercial space, you gotta know like how that, like you said with the DLCs, that's an issue with how like how people make decisions. And I don't know. I just genuinely hope. Yeah, I think your solution is really reasonable. Um, I think encouraging people to keep, discussing on Discords and also just generally getting into the habit. I think with fandom as in general, and if, this extends even to like books and other media and films, because I noticed that as well, is don't be afraid to feel that it's okay to like enjoy the work as it is. Like just appreciate it for what it is, and maybe whatever's released out there is what you're gonna get. Now, whether you want to create a review of it, if you want to create a cosplay, or you want to create a fan work of it, it really is up to you. Just also be respectful of how you zone things, I think. And don't feel entitled to just any kind of approval or any kind of feedback with, if you love something, you shouldn't need feedback from someone else to validate what you love. Like you really should just go out there and share what you really feel. And I could guarantee that that alone, if she ever came across that, would be a positive kind of way, you know?
We can totally go on a whole other tangent. We're already at like 70 minutes into this podcast, impromptu
Yeah.
recording, but yeah, we could totally do another episode on this of just like what it means to create content and like having that shared
Yeah.
out versus like consuming content, right? Or just like somewhat of the toxic nature of
Yeah.
content consumption now, of
Yeah.
feeling like you need to have a point when you can just, if it's
Mm-hmm.
not your vibes, move on. There's so much more content out there,
Yeah.
right? But in interest
Yeah.
of time, I think we'll end it there today.
Yeah.
Hopefully that was interesting for everyone to hear from our perspective of like how we're interpreting Yanagi's like messages and like what we are seeing from our ends and like the parallels and like what other indie developers might be thinking and experiencing on their end too. Of course, this is
Yeah.
just our perspective, and we are not like every indie is set up differently, right? And like we are
Mm-hmm.
in a unique situation where we do have funding. There's like three of us that are working on this full time. And that we're constantly publishing games. So like we're indie, but operating at like a double A studio in terms of like our release schedule and the number of projects that we have. So that like do take that with a grain of salt, is that our experiences are
Yeah.
different too because we have
Yeah, and
metrics.
our processes and our perspectives on social media and how we like outreach and
Yeah.
stuff, they're unique to us. Yeah.
Yeah, because of our goals, right? Our goals as a
Yeah.
studio and what we are aiming for our content and what specific metrics that we goal ourselves to and things like that. So
Mm-hmm.
but hope this was interesting for everyone. We'll try to do more of these. But otherwise, we do have Somnium 11 running on Kickstarter right now. So we mentioned that several times because that was one of our bigger titles that did see success, and we did see this shift at that time too. We also saw some comments as well, and we had received stuff for sifting time, but that can be a whole other conversation of behind the scenes of the things that we've
Yeah.
received and thoughts of the content or the comments that we've received. But Somnia 11 is going on right now for Kickstarter. It is a port of our mobile game. It's one of our best selling ones, I would say, out of all of our existing titles. And so we're really excited to bring it onto PC, onto Steam. And then with that, by redoing it for Steam for PC, we have potentially a future of porting it for console eventually. Right now, it's not quite in our cards. We are looking at our options for porting, but you can hear from our schedule that like we are pretty packed. So having to deal with console porting is a whole other thing that we would need to consider.
Yeah.
But
Just know
one
we're
day,
cooking.
yeah, one day.
Yeah.
Hey, well, I hope
Yeah.
people enjoyed this. Otherwise, please, if you enjoyed Homicipher, please support the dev by purchasing the game
Yeah.
and then writing a review, right? Reviews mean so much to the devs, and that's how they get, how they get pushed up on the algorithm. Of course, they're a little, I guess, in their perspective, they're too popular right now because they wish they were more niche into a
Yeah.
specific um, subset of consumers. But
Mm-hmm.
please, if you have positive
Yeah.
notes, send those positive notes out there, the positive vibes out there for Homicipher if you
Yeah.
enjoyed it.
Yeah. And if you have, I mean, feedback is always great. Just always be mindful. It's constructive. It's going to be out there for others and to read and like I personally think developers at their choice to decide of whether they read it or not personally, but I do think that you just have to remember that there's some level of etiquette you want to make sure to have with any game review that you have. Just remember there's people on the other end.
Yep, people on the other end, and if they're too like, keep in mind they're too busy, they might not respond to you, so just
Hmm.
hopefully don't take it as an offense or an insult to
Yeah.
yeah, it's just life. We all have work life balance and other things going on. So
Yeah.
awesome. Well, thank you everyone. We hope you enjoyed it.
See
Bye.
you. Bye.